Well, I am here in the reading room. I'm sorry it took me so long to get here. It took me a long time because there is a screw up in OBS and it's really starting to make me mad because I keeps opening up to this stupid broadcast when the broadcast should have been deleted a long time ago. And my guess is that just has to do with the same kind of nonsense that's been going on with my computer getting hacked time and time and time and time again. Crazy. I also want to show you too what Kroger has been putting out there because I don't know what these are, but I was just looking up cocoa plants and that's from Kroger. And that's what they look like. So this looks like it without leaves or without berries, right? And this looks like it without leaves. So I don't even know what you guys are doing in order to what? Frame people? I don't know. The terrible black wagons. I will say, though, that I do know that a lot of people, including Susan McFarlane, have wanted to get names out of companies out a lot. Just spewing out company names, apparently to get paid for those company names when they say them online, cha-ching, cha-ching from Amazon, right? Or from, I don't know, the company, right? So that to me is part of the gambling as well. Getting payoffs for that kind of selling of somebody's personal data that they didn't give you the right to have. They didn't give you the right to have it. And give you the right to have it. That's why I'm suing Oakland University in part. About the only thing I recall, the terrible black wagons, about the only thing I recall about our dear mother dying is the coffin, how it smelled of pine and camphor, and how small it was. How was our dear mother to sleep in a place so narrow? That worried me so much I could not sleep or eat until Harold explained that our dear mother was herself now in heaven and had left behind a pale remnant that must be buried in the earth. The pine box would suffice. Still, I didn't understand. What did he mean by remnant? A thing left behind, he told me. How do you know? I asked. He said, Mother told me herself just before she passed. She said we must not grieve over her poor body because it is only a remnant of her immortal soul, and her immortal soul has flown off to be with God. She'll have all the room she needs in heaven, Homer, so you are not to worry. I was 4 years old at the time, which means Harold was only 9, but he comforted me better than any grown-up, and I was able to sleep so long as it was next to him, knowing he would be there always. What makes me think of that little pine box and Harold, too? The terrible black wagons we meet upon the road, not far from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. They are like big hayrick wagons without the hay, drawn by 4 horses, and the whole of each wagon is swaddled in black cloth and marked with the Union emblem. Under the cloth, peeking out here and there, are stacks of cheap pine coffins. The professor pulls our little cavern over to let the death wagons pass and bides us stand with hats off and heads bowed as a sign of respect. As the last wagon goes by, it throws a spoke and nearly overturns. The professor leaps down to offer his assistance and puts Tally and Byrne to work, repairing the wheel while he entertains the driver with his fine talk. A splendid job you're doing bringing comfort to the bereaved, he says. How is it these men were not buried on the battlefield? Most are, of course, the driver says, wiping his sweaty brow with a soiled hanky. These poor brave soldiers died of their wounds sometime after battle, and so are returned to their homes. What battle was this, the professor wants to know. We hear only dribs and drabs of the war. Skirmishes mostly, the driver says. The armies are maneuvering, trying to get position. Near the Potomac, I suppose? The driver shakes his head wearily. West of the river. Lee has been harassing Harrisburg of late. The Union sends its men to find him, and this is how they return, shot to pieces and dying. Some from their wounds, more from sickness and fever. It is a sad business. Very sad, says the professor. Tell me, sir, would a mild tonic help? A pick-me-up? He means his elixir, and the driver readily accepts. As he sips from the bottle, the weary driver becomes even more talkative, and he and the professor discuss the state of war. It seems that after the triumph at Chancellorsville, the Confederate force have indeed come north, as rumored, invading Pennsylvania and looking to put a bayonet through the heart of the Union Army. They say if Lee wins one more battle, the war will be over and the South will be triumphant. Surely not, the professor says, looking much distressed. Our General Hooker can fight, can he not? Hooker? The driver gives him an odd look as he takes another swig of elixir. Have you not heard? Fighting Joe Hooker was resigned in despair or bad temper. No one knows for sure. Lincoln has promoted General Meade in his place and ordered him to stop Lee's army at all cost. Meade is in charge of the army? Extraordinary. You know something of the Union generals, do you? The driver asks suspiciously. The professor clears his throat. Only what I read in the newspaper. I know nothing of Meade but his name, really. The driver shrugs. Ah, well, it is not for us to criticize. It is only for us to serve and die as a general's command. They say that some of the northern states are near rebellion themselves, New York in particular. They want an end to things one way or another. These are the dark days of the war, a time for dying by the thousand. And for what? To free the slaves? I care nothing for slaves. After that, the driver will speak no more. He waits until his wagon is repaired, then trundles off, silent as the grave. The professor stands in the road, watching as the coffin wagon rounds a bend and vanishes from sight, then pats me on the head. Not to worry, young Mr. Figg. If what the man says is true, the war may be over before your brother has to fight. I hope so. I don't want Harold coming home and no black wagon. The Mad Balloon Man, Chapter 27. One fine day, not far from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the wind brings us present. We've been hard upon the road since the night before on account of a certain colonel who took exception to his new recruits drinking the professor's elixir and sent a squad of lively fellows to arrest us. The professor bribed them with silver coin, but still we had to flee and put many miles behind us before the sun rose. I'm riding in the third wagon with Tally, trying to persuade him to stop and cook us breakfast. They say an army travels on its stomach, I reminded him. What about medicine shows? Don't we travel on our stomachs too? Tally shakes his head, keeps the wagon moving. I believe there's an old leather boot under the seat, he says. Chew on that if you like. What's that I hear? I say, putting my hand to my ear. Distant thunder? Artillery? No, it's your empty belly. What a lonesome, hungry noise it makes. Pancakes, Tally, fried potatoes, strawberry pie. Strawberry pie? We passed a whole field of strawberries not a mile back. Fresh strawberries baked in a pie. Good, I say, taunting him by rubbing my stomach. Stop it, you little scamp. We'll have our breakfast when the professor says so, and not before. That's when the great black monster comes over the horizon, blown by the warm summer wind, looks like a giant head making faces at us as it rises over the grassy hills. Professor, Tally cries, standing up in his seat. Look! The wagons halt as an enormous silk balloon fills the sky. The silk bulges and ripples, changing shape with the wind, and looks like a thing alive. As it gets closer, I can make out a basket hanging by ropes, and a man in the basket waving frantically and pointing at something. Beneath the basket is another long rope dragging an anchor. The anchor keeps hitting the ground and bouncing up in the air. Runaway balloon, Tally says, his eyes lighting up. Bernard, let's grab the anchor. The juggling brothers leap from their wagons and give chase. I follow close behind, striving to keep up. The man shouts from the basket, but he must be 100 feet in the air, and the words are jumbled. We're in a country of rolling hills, running through knee-high grass, chasing the anchor as it tumbles and bounces. Tally gets his hands on the anchor and gives a yell of triumph, and then he's yanked into the air and falls tumbling head over heels in the soft grass. Next thing, Byrne leaps over his fallen brother and snatches at the anchor. It drags him along and spins him around as the great balloon pops up again, pushed by the wind. Grab my legs, he yells. Somehow I managed to get both arms around his legs. For a moment, the extra weight seems to hold us down, with my toes dragging along in the grass. Then another gust lifts us high into the air, and we're both screaming for help. Far below us, Tally is running to keep up, begging us to come down to earth. We would if we could, but the fall is too far. I'm hanging on to Burns' legs for dear life. Then as the hill below us rises to the ridge, we swing closer to the ground. We're going so fast the grass looks blurry. Look out, Tally yells, pointing. At the top of the hill looms a cluster of tall elm trees. We're heading right for it. The thick branches look like spears rushing at us. I've half a mind to drop and take my chances, but before I can figure out how to let go, we swoosh into the trees. Last thing I see is a branch exactly as fat as my head. The smell wakes me up, the delicious smell of sausage cooking in a frying pan and coffee boiling on an open fire. Minnie is holding a cool, damp cloth to my forehead, and she smiles when I wake up. Good thing your skull is so thick, she says. It's pure luck your head didn't get cracked like an egg when it hit that tree. What were you thinking? That you could fly like a bird? Above us, a giant balloon is tethered to the elm tree, bobbing to and fro in the breeze. The anchor has wrapped around the branches. The balloon looks so peaceful, you'd never know that when it gets loose, it has a mind to kill the people that are trying to keep it. Glad to see you back in the world, Bern says, bending down to give my nose a little tweak. Bern got stove up some, mostly scratches, but he expects breakfast will revive him. Tally is busy cooking using every available fry pan, preparing sausage and eggs and fried potatoes and onions and what he calls his surefire pan-fried biscuits. When he notices me sitting up, holding my swollen, achy head, he apologizes for not getting any strawberries. I was willing to go back, he says, but the professor insisted we all stay with the balloon. Whispering, he adds, I think he means to buy it. Sure enough, the professor is deep in conversation with the man who is riding in the basket. He's a young, slender, dandified fellow with a wispy black beard and long, skinny nose and the blazing eyes of a true believer. Aeronautics is the future, he's telling the professor with great enthusiasm. Thaddeus Lowe is the living proof, 900 miles in 9 hours. The young man, Dr. Dennett Bobbins, by name, explains that Thaddeus Lowe was appointed by President Lincoln to be Chief of Army Aeronautics after Mr. Lowe flew a balloon from Cincinnati, Ohio to Unionville, South Carolina in the aforementioned 9 hours. For a time, his fleet of Army airships flew over the northern part of Virginia, reporting on Confederate positions. Lately, it seems Confederate sharpshooters and artillerymen have learned how to shoot down the balloons, which do make rather large targets. 1,000 square yards of silk, Mr. Bobbin raves, 28,000 cubic feet of hydrogen generated on the battlefield, 10,000 feet of cable to tether us in place. From 10,000 feet, you can see to the ends of the earth. Tilda and I, the movements of the enemy lose all mystery. Armies can no longer rely on surprise attacks. I tell you, aeronautics is the future. The future, I say. And then suddenly he commences to sob. Tears stream down his cheeks as Mr. Bobbins tells us that on account of so many unfortunate accidents, the unpredictable wind, the hydrogen gas catching a fire, the entire aeronautical division is to be shut down. Mr. Bobbins' balloon is the very last of the fleet, and he has failed in his attempt to survey the Potomac Valley and relay intelligence by telegraph to ground. A summer storm, he wails. I saw a few thunderheads gathering, but gave the order to launch despite the threat of storms. It's my fault, not Tilda's. It was our last chance to prove the value of airship, and I failed. I failed most miserably. Oh, Tilda, do forgive me. As a young airship pilot weeps and wails, Professor Fleabottom pats him on the back and comforts him. It's not your fault, my good sir. You can't be responsible for weather, he assures him. After a time, Mr. Bobbins calms down, accepts a tin mug of coffee from Minerva, and only then seems to take note of his surroundings. Where am I precisely, he wants to know. In the general vicinity of Lancaster, the professor informs him. Lancaster, indeed. Then, according to my calculations, we covered less than 50 miles. He looks up at the balloon bobbing over the elm tree. She's a good ship, with a will of her own, obviously. Tell us, please, of your great adventure, the professor says, sounding very kind and solicitous. Were you... Dirt on my hand. Where that dirt came from. Probably pulling up that weed over there. Were you able to survive the Potomac Valley? Could you discern the Confederate positions? Were you able to pass useful intelligence to Union generals? Young Mr. Bobbin sighs and shakes his head. Alas, no. There were obscuring clouds, and then, just as Tilda and I attained peak altitude, we broke loose from the cable. Disaster. You keep referring to a woman named Tilda. Had you another companion along for the ride? Mr. Bobbins looks shocked at the question. Another companion? No, no. The we is Tilda and I. She is my only companion. The balloon? The airship. Of course. Yes, indeed, the airship. Tilda being the name of the airship, the professor concludes thoughtfully. Minnie, would you get Mr. Bobbins a plate of food? I fear his head may be somewhat light from lack of sustenance or possibly oxygen. 10,000 feet is very high indeed. The air must be terribly thin. No, so thin, not so thin as to addle my brain, if that's what you're implying, Mr. Bobbins says, sounding hurt and angry. Nothing of the sort, the professor assures him. Men have always given female names to waterborne ships. Why not to ships of air? Makes perfect sense if you think about it. Tilda, yes, she's a lovely creature. She's not a creature, she's an airship, Mr. Bobbins protests. Of course, an airship. Please take no offense at our ignorance, good sir. We are fascinated with the whole concept of airships and how they might prove useful to our little traveling enterprise. Aeronautics will change the world, Mr. Bobbins exclaims, regaining his enthusiasm. There will come a day when all of humanity travels by air. We must learn to control the wind. That's the secret. That's the answer. Once we control the wind, we control the world. Windmills, I suppose, the professor offers cautiously. Is that how you will control the wind? The young pilot gives him a disappointed look. You doubt me, but one day it will be true. Humanity will travel by air and conduct war from the air and seek peace in the air. The air is the future, not the land. Mankind must be made free and must unshackle from the slavery of gravity and be free as the clouds, like Tilda and me are. Air, do you hear me? Air. Poor Mr. Bobbins is still raving when the cavalry charges over the hill to arrest us for treason. Okay, tomorrow we will be on chapter 28, like a squirrel. Oh, let's do it this way. Chapter 28, like a squirrel up in a tree. We're getting to the end of our book. Oh my gosh. Chapter 28, 29, and then 30, 31, 32, 33. But those are shorter chapters. And then chapter 36 is the last chapter of the book, and so we are on chapter 28. So thank you so much for joining me. I did a little science here to find out what some of these plants are. I would be interested to know what these plants are that Kroger is selling. I would be kind of interested. I brought out my beautiful roses here, which have similar bulbs on them, right? Again, the bulbs have no leaves on them, and the leaves have no bulbs on them. So, but I don't know what the plants are. I dried these out, and so now I have dried leaves, but I fear that if Kroger is selling coca plants, that this may, which it looks like it is, another way to be able to frame Dr. Philbrick for trying to do good, And I don't expect everyone to act perfect. I have exclaimed the whole Bible is filled with imperfections, complete imperfections. But I don't expect people to make women and children vulnerable and to make them act in ways that, just are serving as opposed to contributing, right? Serving you as opposed to contributing in ways that they are, have talents to contribute. And again, I'm just completely appalled at the goings on in our, with fascist and white supremacist ideas that have been allowed to really prosper and evolve. It's really frightening to me. So I talked about it in the spiritual classroom, and that's why I'm outside kind of taking a look at all that is going on here. And I have been reporting on it because I find it interesting. I also am just a little skeptical because I have been skeptical. So I produced the video in order to get answers and also have evidence about what might be going on over here. This is Dr. Annette Farovich. Thanks for joining me in the reading room. I hope you're enjoying these stories. I am enjoying being the teacher